I just finished my 5-book fantasy series, The Eldenarian Artifacts, the other day, and I immediately got to thinking, what's next? Well, I already know what's next, and like that series which I had started in 2017, I have been working on another series which I started in 2018 that is a trilogy, space opera kind of thing. Not the best way to explain it, but that's what I'm going with right now. Now that I've finished the Ivory Crypt, I'm going to start work on the second book in my science fiction space opera trilogy that I call Elysium Rising. The first book is called Gladiator. It's up on Wattpad if you guys want to read it. And the second book is called Anarchist. And Anarchist is going to be my work in progress for the next however months it takes me to finish it. I actually have not visited this world and, well, more like this galaxy in a couple of years. The last time that I touched it, I think, was in 2023 when I finished the second draft of Gladiator. And yeah, I'm really excited to step back into this world. The two comp titles I would give for this entire trilogy would be Hunger Games meets Star Wars. So it's like the themes and kind of world and plot of Hunger Games meets the scale and scope of Star Wars. And yeah, I kind of mashed those together. The plots are very different from the Hunger Games and Star Wars. Another comp title I would bring up would be the two Gladiator movies by Ridley Scott. Those movies actually inspired a lot of the plot of the first book, and actually the second movie that recently came out in 2024 has kind of inspired the plot of the second book a little bit, just a little bit, more so the character motivations and the themes, not exactly the plot and stuff. But yeah, I'm making this video basically to give you guys a little bit of background on what this series is about, what the world is like, before I jump into a new vlog series where I'm going to be writing Anarchist, book 2 of the Elysium Rising trilogy. Now, before I get into the general plot and characters of this series, let's dive into the world really quickly. Because this is science fiction, the world and world building and lore that I had to create is a lot larger than my fantasy series and my other series that I've worked on that I have not talked about on this channel. I will eventually, but yeah. So I have to do a lot more world building because there's brand new planets, star systems, alien races, religions, all kinds of things that I had to come up with for this series. So the world building is at a much larger scale and it's very much at the forefront of this series. So before I get into the characters and plot, I'm going to dive into the world a little bit. Now, first off, Elysium Rising is the third series in my Eternal Keyverse world building project. And the kind of purpose of this series was to delve into the more space side of the universe. All of my series kind of tackle a different sector of the universe. So like the Eldenarian Artifacts is the more fantasy magic side. My superhero trilogy that's called the Prime Archives dives into the more human side, and this series dives into the space side, or I guess I could say the galactic side of the universe. This series takes place in another galaxy that's not too far away from ours that I call the Key. It is an irregular shaped galaxy that is vaguely shaped like a key head, which is why it's called the Key. It's known by many names throughout the galaxy, but almost all of the names translate into the Key in some way, shape, or form. Now, previously when I was first working on this series, this galaxy was actually called the Cygnus Eridani, but I realized I had to change that because it's very close to the name of the galaxy in the Halo series, which is the Upsilon Eridani. So I was like, yeah, I can't do that. I have to come up with a new name. And considering that I'm working on a project called the Eternal Keyverse, and this galaxy is one of the most important places in the entire world that I'm building, I think it's pretty fitting that it's called the Key now. The Key is divided into 8 major sectors that are controlled by 3 major powers, and the following sectors are the core, which is largely uncharted and uninhabited. At least that's what most people think. It's pretty dangerous because there aren't many star maps for these worlds, and yeah, it's just not much is known about it. Next up, we've got the inner, mid, and outer rims, which are all controlled by the Elysian Empire, the main antagonist of the series. The Elysian Empire is the biggest superpower in the galaxy. They control tons of planets, they have billions of people under their rule, and they like to call themselves the most perfect and advanced species in the entire galaxy, and they control those 3 sectors: the inner, mid, and outer rims. Next up, we've got the Exar systems, and these are currently controlled by the Exarian Alliance. And the Exarian Alliance is a collection of worlds, governments within the Exar systems and the next sector, called the Crucible, who have banded together to fight back against the tyranny of the Elysian Empire, because the Elysian Empire, they want to take over. And not everybody's okay with that. The Exarian Alliance is comprised of various worlds throughout the Exar systems and the Crucible, which make up a decent amount of the galaxy, but not as much as the sectors that the Elysian Empire controls. Next up, we've got the Caecilian Traverse. This section of the galaxy is probably my favorite because it's where all the magic comes from. There is magic in this galaxy. It's similar to that from my fantasy series. More on that much later down the line because I'm not ready to talk about that yet. But yes, this is where magic comes from. The main superpower that controls this sector of the galaxy is called the Majin Majirian. It's named after the Majin people who are from the planet Eos. They are a very religious group of people. They're largely peaceful. They are the species in the galaxy that has the most affinity with magic, so it kind of makes them the most powerful. And the Caecilian Traverse sits between the Exar systems and the Elysian controlled sectors, which makes it a very contentious point for the upcoming war. And lastly, the last section, we've got the Far Reaches, and like the core, these are largely untamed, unclaimed. There are a lot of pirates and like anarchist factions that rule these places. Even the Elysian Empire doesn't go down here because yeah, it gets kind of dicey in the Far Reaches. But yeah, those are the main sectors of the galaxy that are claimed. There's other areas that I have not fleshed out yet because there's no one really there. There's no large spheres of influence. So these are the main 8 kind of locations that I'm going to be diving into within these 3 books and potentially other stories that I may write in the future. Now, with that out of the way, let's dive into the main plot of this series. I'm going to start off with the characters first, actually. This series revolves around 3 main characters. I call them my trio. And the first up is my protagonist, Igori Amrata. Now that name is a little hard to say, I guess, or hard to pronounce, especially if you read the way I've spelled it. So for most of the series, he's referred to as just Iggy. And yeah, I love Iggy. He's kind of like one of my favorite protagonists, and I hate that I have not touched this series for so long. The way I would kind of describe his personality is he's very distrustful of the Empire because they rule with an iron grip. They really kind of oppress their subjects if you're not in. And Iggy is not an Elysian, he's an Aragori from a planet that's actually not controlled by the Elysian Empire, but he was forced to move to a planet within the Empire for reasons I'm not getting into right now. But yeah, he's very distrustful of the Empire, but he follows their rule because it's all he knows. He's very sarcastic. He's one of my funnier main characters. I was actually reading a couple chapters of the first book in the series, Gladiator, the other day, trying to brush up my knowledge of this series because I have not touched it since 2023. And I was like, yo, this kid is actually really funny. I miss writing him. So yeah, he's kind of seen as a weakling. He's very he's young and he's frail. He's not very strong. He did not know how to fight before Gladiator started. And yeah, so he's kind of got a chip on his shoulder. He's constantly trying to prove himself. Yeah, that's pretty much Iggy. He's our protagonist. He's the guy who's got the point of view, who we're following through most of the story, and most of the story revolves around him. Next up, we've got another one of my most favorite characters that I've ever written about, and he is Jackson Gunn. He is a member of the Exarian Alliance. He is a spy who snuck onto Elysian, and he crosses paths with Iggy, and because Iggy meets Jackson, he's inspired to join the rebellion. And yeah, Jackson is very, very confident, borderline cocky even. While the Alliance sent him to Elysium Prime, the home world of the Elysians, as a spy, he looks at himself mainly as the greatest pilot in the entire galaxy. As I start talking about these main 3 characters, you're going to see the parallels between my book in Star Wars, and that was kind of on purpose. I kind of modeled my trio after the trio in the original Star Wars movies: Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and Princess Leia. And yeah, that's kind of how I built the foundation. My characters are very different from those, but you're gonna see the similarities. So yeah, Jackson Gunn is kind of like my Han Solo. He's very cocky, very smooth talking, but I think I dive into Jackson, you know, backstory and motivations a lot more than the Star Wars movies do with Han Solo, because Jackson's confidence is really just a front. He was born an orphan on a planet that was run by pirates and thieves and murderers, so he had to come up in that kind of environment. He had to scrape his way to the top. He found himself immigrating to the Elysian Empire to join their fleet, and he showed a lot of talent there, but he was eventually kicked out because of his unorthodox flying methods. So, scorned by the Empire, he fled to the Exaris. He fled to the Exaris systems, got in contact with some rebels, and joined the Alliance. And yeah, that's kind of Jackson's character so far. He's still trying to prove himself to the rebels as he's one of the newer recruits, but his skill set has kind of propelled him through the ranks really quickly, which is why he was able to become a spy sent to the Elysian homeworld. So yeah, that's Jackson. Hopefully that made sense to you. In the vlogs, I'll probably be a lot more coherent when talking about these characters because I'll know a lot more about them. Right now, I'm still kind of figuring things out because while I have finished one book in this series, I'm still getting in the process of knowing these characters and the plot, and I'm changing things as I go. So it's very much a work in progress. And lastly, for the main trio of like protagonists in this series, we've got High Priestess Noya Adani. She is the fiance of the Emperor, who is the main antagonist, who I will be getting to in a second. But yes, High Priestess Noya, who is also a princess, comes from the Majin Majirian from the planet Eos. She is a high priestess, which means she is very adept at magic. She's very spiritual, and she's also a princess. That means her mother is the leader of the Majirian. And before the events of Gladiator, her mother and the Empire made a pact to kind of bridge the Elysian Empire's sector with the Caecilian Traverse, which is one of the most contested sectors in the galaxy. And to kind of consummate this relationship, the Emperor decided to not marry the Majirian leader, but instead her daughter, which is Noya. So yes, Noya is the fiance of the Emperor, and I'm trying to think, how would I describe her? She's kind of aloof in a way, like she doesn't speak much and she speaks very kind of bluntly, so you kind of always think she's being mean to you, but she's not really. That's just kind of how she talks. But she also, one thing I remember that I did with her dialogue is she speaks in double meanings a lot of the time. She's kind of very poetic with the way she talks, and a lot of what she says has double meaning, which kind of goes great with her character because she's kind of caught in the middle of the Empire and the Alliance. The events of Gladiator reveal that she is actually involved with the rebellion in some way, shape, or form, and that's why she feels like she's in the middle of it all, because on one side she's got her fiance, the Emperor, and on the other side she's got her connection with Jackson, who was a rebel. And yeah, I'm also still figuring out the kinks of her character, but she was also one of my favorite parts of this last book that I wrote in this series. And yeah, that's a lot of rambling. Don't know if any of it made any sense, but those are my 3 main characters of the Elysium Rising series. Now, let's get on to my main antagonist, Voltai Alcastus, the Emperor of the Elysian Empire. I hate this guy, but I love him at the same time. He is also very cocky, very snake-tongued. He's very religious, but not in like a super crazy way. The Elysian Empire follows a religion that I call the Covenant of the First Father, and basically the religion was born after the First War, which was fought on ancient Elysium Prime between the original 13 tribes, and it was ended by the First Father, who was a king of one of these tribes, and he united all the Elysians together under the mission that they need to spread not their propaganda, but they need to spread their ideology that they are the perfect species upon the rest of the galaxy. And because they believe they're the perfect species and they have all this advanced technology, they think that they're doing a service to the galaxy and they're making it better, but instead they're kind of just making themselves hated by everybody. So yeah, that's just a brief rundown on the religion that most of the Elysians believe. And Voltaire is a very much a proponent of this religion. He kind of references it all the time. It leads all of his actions and motivations. The three, I guess, virtues of the religion are perfection, prosperity, and progress. And these are all things that Voltaire is trying to push upon, everyone in the galaxy. That's why he wants to control all of the sectors, every place that he can. He wants to, spread his influence. And prior to the events of the first book in the series, Voltaire was named the new emperor of the empire. And he's kind of similar to President Snow. This is kind of where the Hunger Games influence comes from. And yeah, his route to becoming emperor was not a clean one. And that gets delved into more as the series unfolds. I touch on it a little bit in the first book, but not really, because while he's the antagonist, he doesn't have too much screen time, which, I may have to, amend that when I eventually rewrite Gladiator, but we're not worried about that right now. We're working on Anarchist. But yeah, that's Voltaire. He's kind of very, shady. He puts on a good front for the people. He's a great talker, great speech giver. I kind of don't know if I'm allowed to say this name on YouTube, but I'm going to. It rhymes with Littler. He's very similar to Littler from, that period of human history. But yeah, that's Voltaire. Those are my, main characters who the series is revolved around. Of course, there's other characters, but, they're not super important right now. Not at least until I start talking about Anarchists, but I'm not there yet. I still got to talk about the plot of Gladiator. But yeah, those are my main characters, and I hope some of that made sense to you. Now, let's talk about some of the themes that are going to be reoccurring throughout this series. So some of the most important themes throughout all three of these books are the ideas of colonialism, manifest destiny. I'll throw a definition of manifest destiny if you guys are not familiar with that term, but that is a pretty prominent theme throughout these books. We've got revenge. Throughout, multiple characters are seeking revenge in some way, shape, or form. We've got the idea of purpose or destiny. Basically, specifically with Iggy and Jackson, they kind of are trying to figure out what their purpose is and what their destiny is, because they kind of have grown up feeling useless, and they just kind of want to feel like what they're doing matters. So that's kind of where the ideas of, purpose and destiny show up in these books. And lastly, we've got the place of religion / spirituality in a modern or advanced world, because this is science fiction, and we're going to be spending a lot of time in the Elysian Empire owned sectors of the universe, which means those are going to be very developed planets with lots of advanced technology. And one question that's kind of asked in these books is, what is the place of religion and spirituality on these worlds? While the Elysian Empire is kind of run by religion, it's not a theocracy. Their religion kind of just inspires their actions. There are theocratic, civilizations throughout the galaxy, but the Empire kind of wants to force their religion on everybody else. And that's another thing that shows up throughout this series, the idea of religious suppression. And yeah, those are like the main themes of this series. And yeah, let's talk about some of the plot points that I'm going to be getting into throughout these three books. So my notes, my screen has my notes. I've already talked about the religion, the covenant of the first father. So let's get into, let's get into one of my favorite things. Like I mentioned, religion is going to be kind of very important. While the Empire is currently the largest superpower in the galaxy, there used to be another group that existed. They didn't run the universe, but they used to help peacekeep, if that makes sense. They're very similar to the Jedi Order, where they kind of would go around helping different planets in their conflicts and trying to, keep the peace. And this order is called the Centauri Order. And they used to be very prominent around the time of the First War, when the Elysians were at war with each other. And they actually helped stop this war and bring peace to Elysium Prime. But then the Elysians, they grew up. They created an empire. They started oppressing different nations, and then they waged the war against the Centauri Order because they realized that they cannot control these people because they are an independent peacekeeping faction. The Centauri Order, like the Majin Majirian, they had access to magic. They were some of the most powerful magic users in the entire galaxy. And the Elysians were like, yeah, they're gonna be a problem. So they kind of eradicated all of them. So at this point in time in history, when Elysium Rising is taking place, the Centauri Order is no more. There's no peacekeeping faction to keep the Empire in check. And yeah, that's going to be one of the major plot points that I talk about throughout this series. They don't really get mentioned much in Gladiator, but they do get mentioned a lot in Anarchist and a lot in the third book. I'm not going to say the title right now. I do have the title, but I'm not going to say it right now. So yeah, that's the Centauri Order. They were a big deal, but the Elysian Empire scrubbed like all knowledge and memory of them from the galaxy. So only a very select few people know about them. But yeah, that's the Centauri Order. Next up, we've got the Elysian Gladiator games. This is kind of the main event that takes place in the book Gladiator, as you can tell by the name. Iggy has to fight in these games for a reason that I'll get into later. And yeah, they're kind of a regular tournament that's hosted on the Elysian home planet, Elysium Prime. And yeah, this is where the Hunger Games influence kind of comes from. It's not a bunch of kids murdering each other. It's more like criminals of the Empire, at least. Not all of them are actually criminals, but they're kind of people who have broken laws, and instead of being executed on the spot, they're given the chance to fight for their freedom in the Gladiator games. This is like the main thing that's going on in Gladiator. What's next? Another plot point that is important in the first book, and that kind of inspires the events of the second book, is that the Exarian Alliance, in an attempt to kind of evade all-out war, sent a spy into the Elysian home world during the Gladiator games to kidnap or assassinate the Emperor. And yeah, that doesn't exactly go as planned, which leads into the events of Anarchist. Now, I realize a lot of this information is kind of all over the place, so to kind of make it more concise and to make it make sense, I'm just going to go ahead and read the synopsis, or I guess blurb, of the first book, Gladiator, so you guys can get more of a sense of what the first book is about and where we're headed with the second book. So I decided I'm actually going to read a query letter that I drafted for Gladiator that pretty much goes over the entire plot without spoiling crazily. So yeah, here goes. Should any citizen of the Elysian Empire be caught involved in any rebellious activities, they will be sentenced to death. Emperor's orders. But Iggy Emrata isn't a rebel. He's just a poor salt miner trying to provide for his sick mother ever since his father vanished. When an accident brands him as a thief and a rebel, he's forced to take the fall for a crime he didn't commit just to protect his mother. However, Iggy isn't executed. Instead, he's given the chance to fight for his freedom in the Elysian Gladiator games. But everyone knows those who fight in the games are as good as dead. Iggy is thrust into the chaos of the arena and Elysian politics the second he enters Elysium Prime's airspace. A jaded warrior takes him under his wing, a spy for the mysterious rebellion solicits his help, and a magical priestess fated to marry the newly appointed emperor takes a strange interest in his progress during the games. Soon, all eyes are on Iggy, and for all the wrong reasons. Eventually, he'll have to pick a side. Will Iggy survive the games and return home to his mother, or will the arena swallow him whole? Okay, so now that you guys have some background on what Gladiator was about and where, the story was kind of headed, I'm going to break down where Anarchist is headed. And yeah, this is going to have spoilers for Gladiator. So if you guys don't want to be spoiled and you actually want to read the first draft, which is up on Wattpad, I would say skip this part. I'll throw a timestamp on the screen to where you guys can skip to where the spoilers are over. Let's get into where we're headed with Anarchist. At the end of Gladiator, Iggy has escaped the Gladiator games and the arena with the help of Jackson and Noya. At this point, all three of them have kind of joined the rebellion. There's like no going back at this point. They've kind of all made their decision, and yeah. After escaping Elysium Prime, the three main characters are headed to Zonaru, which is where the headquarters of the Exarian Alliance is. At the end of Gladiator, they failed to kidnap or execute the Emperor, which has backfired like in a really bad way. At this point, the Elysian Empire is really pissed and they have declared all-out war on the Exarian Alliance. So when the three main characters get to Zonaru, the Chancellor of the Alliance is super pissed. The Chancellor's name is Masadi, and when Jackson tells Masadi what happened, Jackson is immediately demoted and relegated to training new recruits on how to fly, warships and, speed fighters and stuff like that. But Masadi realizes that while they did fail to capture the Empire, Now, Masadi realizes while they did fail to assassinate or kidnap the Emperor, they did kind of pull off something crazy, which is that they managed to turn the Emperor's own fiance against him, and they broke someone out of the Gladiator games. And not just anyone, they broke out the winner, which has never happened before. Usually the winner of the Gladiator games, while they get to buy their freedom, they kind of just stay within the Elysian Empire and they're used and paraded around as a pawn. So yeah, Masadi's like, hey, we've got two of the Empire's most marquee defectors on our side. Let's use them in our propaganda as we try to get more people to turn against the Emperor. So that's kind of what Masadi plans to do with Iggy and High Priestess Noya, and they're not satisfied with being used as props. Noya is kind of uncomfortable with this because it goes against her religion, and Iggy wants revenge against the Empire and wants to be doing more instead of, he doesn't just want to be like on TV screens spouting out Exarian propaganda. He wants to be on the front lines fighting. And yeah, that's kind of where we're left with those characters at the end of Gladiator and at the beginning of Anarchist. And yeah, I'm still working out what the main plot of this book is going to be, but it's going to revolve around the three main characters and the crew of Jackson's ship going on an unsanctioned mission to help turn the tide in the sparking war throughout the galaxy. Jackson and Iggy are both dissatisfied with their demotion in a sense, and they want to be doing more. So they come up with a plan to do something that's going to help turn the tide of the war and sway things in their direction. But they're going to be doing it without the assistance of the Exarian Alliance, which is going to put them in some pretty sticky situations. Noya ends up coming along with them so that they don't get in trouble, but you know, as always, they're going to get in trouble regardless. But yeah, that's pretty much like the basic plot that I have figured out so far. Throughout the vlogs, I'm going to be, you know, fleshing this out more. I kind of like this idea that I have so far. It like, just thinking about it is giving me like ideas, and like it sounds pretty fun to me. So I can't wait to get started writing on Anarchist. But yeah, that was pretty much all of the notes and stuff I have on Elysium Prime. I know this video is kind of all over the place because all of my knowledge and information when it comes to this series is all over the place. But hopefully some of that made sense to you, and hopefully it made you just as excited as I am when it comes to writing this series. If you aren't already, make sure you subscribe so you guys can stay up to date with all my upcoming vlogs where I dive deeper into the series and write the second book in the trilogy. Make sure to like this video if you enjoy it, and let me know what you're working on in the comments, and also let me know what your favorite science fiction series is. I would love to hear about it because I need to do a little bit more research when it comes to writing science fiction. This is kind of my first time diving into a project of this scale. But that'll be all for this video. I've been LDJ Writes, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.